There were 76 innocent passengers who boarded American Airlines Flight 11 in Boston on September 11th, 2001. All of them lost their lives when the hijacked plane crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 on that beautifully sunny morning. Among them, Peter Gay. Peter was Bruce DePrest's brother-in-law, and Bruce is joining me now to talk about some of the memories of that day and how it has impacted your family. Bruce, thank you for being here to talk about this as we mark this 20-year period.
Yes, thank you so much. I can't believe it's been 20 years, but it's something that we have to continue to talk about for sure and not forget, because our family has not forgotten over these 20 years. There's still memorial services that go on, and it's kind of turned the family into a close-knit family. So, you know, good things come out of bad things, I have to say. We have to look at it in a positive way. But I do remember that awful day very well. Back then I was working the morning shift, and I remember watching CBS News, and all of a sudden they were talking about a plane that hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And the initial thought was, bad pilot.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, a second plane hits. So I called up my wife then, Laurel, and I said, Laurel, she was at work, and I said, you can't believe what's going on in New York City. It's starting to look more and more like an intentional attack on New York City. I said this was a flight, one of the flights came from Boston and was on its way to Los Angeles. And she says, Bruce, oh my God, Peter takes that plane every week. He worked for Raytheon.
Okay.
And he was involved heavily in the Patriot missile program for Raytheon. And every week he flew from Boston to Los Angeles. So I called the law firm. This is a big family. Laurel's family was big. She was one of 7. She was the only girl. And Peter was her second oldest brother. So I called the law firm up in Massachusetts. Her father was a lawyer, prominent attorney, and 2 of her brothers were attorneys. And I said, do you know if Peter is okay? And I don't even think they knew at the time that there was an attack on New York City. And I said, you might want to call his work, Raytheon, which was up in northeastern Massachusetts, and find out if he was on that plane. And they called, and sure enough, he was on that plane. He had not called in and said that he was okay. He did not miss the flight. He was definitely on the plane. There's no doubt about that. So by late that morning, we already knew that Peter was gone. And I had to do the noon show that day. But fortunately, I mean, for me, you know, because I was a mess. And I was saying to myself, how can I do the noon show knowing that my brother-in-law just died in a terrorist attack? But we stayed with CBS programming. And fortunately for me, I did not have to go on air as a complete mess and still trying to figure out what was going on.
Well, and interesting is, as journalists and as people telling the stories, we are human and we have these emotions. We've talked about that with some of our former news director, who's also got an interview that people can watch on the app. But at the same time, did you feel like this is where you wanted to be? You wanted to continue to be able to see the very latest information so that you could then guide your family? Yes,
you know, it was very helpful to be part of the media on that day and watch how Channel 3 came together. I always say that Channel 3 is at its best when things are at its worst. And that was the case with 9/11. So I was informed, and I kept everybody else in the family informed. So in that respect, it was good. But at the same time, I wanted to be home and make sure my kids were okay. Brendan right now is, he's 35. He's going on 36. David is 33. And back then, they were 13 and 15. And very vulnerable, and you know your world is shattered. You know, you're used to seeing terrorist attacks in other countries and other places in the United States, but here's something hit home. It's your own family member that died in a terrorist attack, and that's hard to get a handle on that. But I did have some time off afterwards, and we all congregated at the family cottage in Onset, Massachusetts. And I remember how eerie it was for several nights, where jets were taking off from the Air Force Base, I guess really patrolling things and making sure everything was okay. But it was kind of making everybody a little bit scared and uneasy, but at the same time knowing that they're protecting us. So those days following were eerie, for sure. We had a beautiful memorial service for Peter weeks later up in.
You were one of the few families, anyway, you were able to have a memorial service, even with some remains. He was able to be identified.
He was. What happened was, initially we had a memorial service not knowing that he was actually found. Then later, after the memorial service, we got notified that they found Peter. His remains, evidently, you know, he was found on the north side of the North Tower, where the plane crashed into. They identified him through dental records, and they sent him back to Massachusetts, Taunton, Massachusetts, in a sealed casket, and then we had a funeral. So at least for the family, there was some sense of closure.
He had a young daughter.
A young Larissa. What a beautiful girl. She was 8 years old at the time. Now she's a grown woman with a child, and she's a beautiful girl. And Peter, believe it or not, Peter wanted to stop flying to Los Angeles. He was going to stop doing that in December because he wanted to spend more time home with his wife, Linda, and daughter, Larissa.
And sadly also, he had asked for an extra day off. He would have normally flown on the Monday, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, he had taken an extra day off, which is why he was taking the flight on September 11th.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he was a good guy. You know, I remember Peter as, he was a brilliant electrical engineer, brilliant, but at the same time, he was tough. At the family cottage, he would fix everything, and he would leave notes, don't do this, don't do that. And everybody obeyed him because, you know, if you didn't, you would, there'd be a price to pay. So he was a tough guy, and I don't know how he reacted on the aircraft or you know, what transpired in those final moments before the plane hit the North Tower. But, you know, I know Peter, knowing him, he probably tried to do something. You know, just
he wouldn't have gone down without a fight, right?
Exactly. Yeah, he was that kind of guy.
And as you reflect back, we're coming up on the 20 years. Is there something special your family will do, or how you will mark this day?
Well, what I'll do is I'll be there for my sons. You know, if they want to talk to me, I give them space. You know, David, my younger son, is kind of quiet about all this. My older son, Brendan, is more vulnerable and vocal about it. So I'm there for them. You know, it still bothers me like you can't believe, and it's surreal. But I will be there for them, and I know my ex-wife Laurel is going to be reading Peter's name at a memorial service in Boston on that Saturday.
Well, Bruce, we thank you for sharing this story. It's important that people remember the stories like this and so many people who were impacted forever by that day.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to share my story. It's very unique. It makes you feel vulnerable, and it's something that you can never imagine would happen to your own family, but it did. And like I said, a lot of good things came out of that bad day. There, you know, on Sept Bay, there's even a bench that people can sit on that says "In memory of Peter Gay," overlooking this beautiful harbor.
Well, you are always the eternal optimist, and I know even in the newsroom on crisis days like that, your presence is always welcome. So
well, thank you.
It makes sense to me that you would look for the bright side, which is what you do. So thank you.
We have to. Thank you very much.
Yeah.